Hello. Thank you for once again joining me, your instructor Vern Creviston, in one of our introductory videos on the phone or textbook, this one on Chapter 16, America's Gilded Age. Now, a couple things before we get started. Once again, remember, not a substitution for the textbook lecture PowerPoints, so please, this is just a supplement, something to kind of go along with it. It's going to have some things that I want to kind of emphasize a little bit more than maybe what your textbook does. And this is on this period called the Gilded Age, this period of rapid industrialization in the United States after the end of the Civil War, really almost at the end of Reconstruction. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on, is what a lot of historians have called the Great Transformation, where the United States goes from being kind of a rural, agricultural-based economy to really an industrial powerhouse, eventually the world's largest industrial economy. Right, so we're going to kind of look at some of this, look at some of the major themes of this period as we kind of go through this short introductory video today. All right. So some things I kind of want you to kind of keep in mind as we look through this. Once again, big theme of this period is this switch over from being an agricultural-based economy, one where 80% of all Americans lived on a farm, grew their own food, produced many of their own goods, right? Switching over to an industrial-based economy where Americans work for a wage, work in a business, no longer kind of control their own destiny, if you will. It's not up to them to decide when they get up and what to do. Now they have to follow a schedule, do the work that's assigned them, do it in the manner that they're told to do it in, right? A much different work relationship is going on there. Kind of think about that major transformation, right? This big change that happens. Americans living on a farm. Think about that. Who gets to decide when you get up? How do you organize your life, right? Do you follow carefully scripted time schedules, or do you kind of follow the seasons, the time of day, do things in a certain order, kind of at your own choosing? And then contrast that to work in a factory. Right? Do you get to choose when you show up to work at a factory? No. Most of us know that we have time schedules to keep there. We're expected to be at work at a certain time. We can't leave until a certain time. So these are some big changes that are going to happen in the United States. And one of the biggest is the fact that Americans no longer produce their own goods. They now buy and sell from each other. They now work for a lot of other people. So there's some big things changing. And not only that, physically where Americans live change. Instead of being a rural-based kind of a society, now we're an urban-based society. America's going to go from being mostly living on farms and small communities to living in big metropolitan centers. So a big shift happening in the United States. And with this big shift comes up some other major changes, one of the biggest being this wide disparity in wealth that begins to appear in the United States. You're going to have some people that are going to make fantastic amounts of money. So they're going to become some of the richest people in the world. They're going to command a lot of power and influence with that money. And at the same time, there's going to be a huge number of Americans that are going to live in abject poverty, really not even knowing where their next meal's coming from, not having indoor plumbing, right? Not being able to go to a doctor when they're sick. So there's going to be some big shifts in American society. There are going to be some big problems in American society that Americans are going to have to deal with at some point, right? And then kind of going in along with this, there's this third theme, because this is a period of what's called laissez-faire capitalism, where American industry is kind of left to run things itself, where they're seen as being the ones to kind of best regulate the American economy is the American economy itself. The United States government really doesn't get involved in a big way, except in certain special circumstances. There's really a lack of government oversight during this period. Businesses are kind of left to run rampant, kind of do what they think is best. And the reason is this because of this idea of social Darwinism that comes about at the same time as this second industrial revolution, this major shift in American economic might. And that's this idea of taking these ideas of biology, right? The idea that Darwin put out that organisms change over time and applying that to society. Some philosophers, some social engineers, if you will, take those scientific principles and apply them to society at large, saying that this is a process that has to happen, that the best are going to survive and the weakest, those that aren't the best, are going to die off or be replaced by others. Right? So Americans and many people in the Western world come to see this as kind of being the way things should be. That's the natural order of things, if you will. So if you ended up being poor, you were poor because of your choices. The things that you did made you poor. It wasn't that you weren't given opportunity. It wasn't that somebody else took advantage of you. It was that you did not do your job the way you should have. So there are some big ideas in this period, and they're incredibly important for us to really understand, right? The only way we can understand going forward the way America is and the way Americans see their world is to really understand the Gilded Age. So with that being said, let's kind of take a look at some of what's going on in the United States. First and foremost, kind of, again, keep in mind that this tremendous shift that's happening from the rural to the urban. Right, in the 1860s, during the Civil War, most Americans actually still lived on farms, whether you lived in the North or the South or the West. Whatever region of the United States you were in, chances are you lived on a farm or you had family members that lived on a farm. But slowly, during the 19th century, this is going to change, and this will become very rapid into the 20th century. Right? We're going to shift from being a mostly rural country to a mostly urban country. And with that, people are going to change the way they work. They go into the cities and get jobs, working for other people, either domestically. A lot of women are going to become domestic servants. A lot of men are going to go to work in businesses and shops and in factories like this Homestead Steel Mill here in the 1890s in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And a lot of people are going to start working with their hands with machines, right? Instead of growing food, they're going to make items. Items are going to be sold to either other Americans or shipped overseas to other countries. So it's going to create a tremendous amount of wealth through this process of work, but at the same time, you're not in control like you had been. When you owned your own farm or worked on a farm with your family members, you got to decide what happened and when it happened. Now you are subject to somebody else's timetable, somebody else's desire, somebody else's oversight. And for that, you were given a certain wage. Sometimes that wage was a good wage. If you worked in a steel mill, some of the best paid American workers were in steel mills. But if you weren't, if you were a domestic servant working for a middle class or upper class family in New York, maybe you didn't make enough to survive. So again, your chances of survival now were tied to somebody else's abilities or somebody else's largesse, right? The ability, what they were willing to give you. So there's some massive changes that are happening in the United States society at this time. And as more and more workers enter the workforce, there's a tremendous amount of competition. Of course, employers are going to want to get the cheapest labor they can. And as you can see from this photo, a lot of new faces enter in to the workforce, a lot of young faces. Look at where I'm using this pointer device here to kind of highlight some of these faces. Look at some of these children working in a coal mine in Pennsylvania that's going to feed a lot of those steel mills. Right? You can see the adults are kind of back here in the background, very far in the back. But up front, what do you have? Maybe 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old kids, maybe up into the late teens, then some adults with them as well. So there's a tremendous amount of people, right? It's not just 40, 50-year-old guys coming from the farms to the factories. It's entire families sometimes, individuals moving to the cities. And when they get there, they have to find work. They have to find a way to make ends meet. And it's not just going to be men and children. A lot of women as well are going to come and find work in the factories, or as I said before, domestic servants. Once again, leading to more competition for these jobs, which means wages are going to be depressed sometimes. It means they're not going to make as much as they might need to survive, which is going to make it very difficult for a lot of American families to stay above water, to really be successful, to really afford things like an education. Think about those kids. Where should they be? Where would they be today? Instead of in a coal mine, they'd be in a school. Well, back then, because they had to work to help support their families, they don't have those opportunities at education. So there's a lot of things going on here in the Gilded Age that we really need to keep in mind. Changes happening in the United States. And with all this competition for jobs, with these competition for resources, with this need to kind of keep yourself afloat, right, to be able to make ends meet, some people are going to do quite well. People like Andrew Carnegie, the owner of that steel mill. He's going to be able to live in relative opulence. He's going to have a number of mansions in the New York City area, one of which is shown here on the screen is in central New York near what's today's Central Park on Fifth Avenue. He is going to be kind of the epitome of what can go right in this system when you use a lot of your ideas, when you use a lot of your hard work to really get ahead, when you can make yourself come up with a better idea that you can sell and make a lot of money, when you can be a ruthless competitor and push your competitors out of business, right? It's going to allow you to amass a great fortune, a huge amount of wealth. But right next door, virtually to where he lives, some of his workers live in what are called shanties, or tenements is what the word was at that particular time, kind of early apartment buildings where whole families, sometimes even, Many families are crowded into small apartments, sometimes without toilets, without running water, without garbage service. So some people are going to live in abject poverty, while other Americans, very close by in the same cities, are going to live in just opulent wealth. So Americans have to kind of come to grips with this, right? Why am I poor? Why is he rich? Why does he get to live that way and I don't get to live that way, right? Why do I have to live like this? Why do I have to live in a tenement? Why do I have to be sick and can't afford to go to a doctor? So Americans have to kind of come to grips with this. And what we do are through these stories of the period, where people like the writer Horatio Alger Jr. is going to write hundreds of books on the same basic theme, that anybody in America can make it if they work hard enough, if they save their money, if they invest in themselves, if they're honest, if they do all these things, then they can be an Andrew Carnegie, they can be a John D. Rockefeller, right? One of these great industrialists that amass all these fortunes. If you don't, if you're not honest, if you don't save your money, if you don't work hard, then you're going to stay poor. You're going to live in squalor, and eventually you're going to die from your own inabilities, right? So there's a kind of a harsh reality to all of this. Now, Alger tries to paint a good picture of this, trying to say that really this opportunity is available to anybody who wants to seize it. His books become known as rags to riches stories, and a lot of times Americans are going to refer to other Americans as, you're a real Horatio Alger story, aren't you? The idea that you've made something of yourself by yourself, right? This rugged individualism is sometimes what we call it today. So in a lot of Horatio Alger's books, he's going to take some, orphan off the streets of one of these big industrial cities, and is going to show his readers how you can do it, how you can become a success. In some ways, kind of developing an early version of the American dream, right? That anybody can do whatever they really want to set out to do in American society. Now, Alger's ideas of this society, this growth of this American dream, right? The growth of the American dream is this idea of social Darwinism that I mentioned at the very beginning. And behind it is this idea that philosophers like this guy Herbert Spencer from England, right, a friend of Charles Darwin's actually, who reads Darwin's Origins of the Species and says, hey, look, that's a good idea that you have there, Charles. This idea of survival of the fittest, that those that are best fit to survive will survive. Well, Spencer takes his friend Charles Darwin's ideas of biology and applies it to society, and says that the same thing that happens in the natural world between animals will happen here in human society. That those businesses that are run the best, that provide the best service, that provide the best products are going to survive, and those that don't are going to be destroyed by those competitors. People will naturally flock to the best alternative. And he says the same thing's going to happen amongst the workers themselves. Businesses are going to hire the best workers and leave those other workers out in the cold, if you will. Have to work for a subsistence level, sometimes maybe not even subsistence level. Maybe they'll actually starve to death because they're unable to work because they just don't have the skills or the ability or the desire to work hard enough. Spencer called this the weeding out process, both for businesses and for individuals. Those that should make it, those that can make it, those that have the best idea and the best work ethic, we're going to naturally succeed, and everybody else was going to fail, ultimately die, either as a corporation going out of business or as in a person literally dropping dead because of their inabilities, right? And Americans were kind of okay with this, right? They kind of saw this as the individual's responsibility, right? That it's up to you to kind of do these things. They didn't look to government to kind of solve a lot of these problems, to kind of provide orphanages for kids without parents, right? To look for welfare checks, right, for people that were out of work. Americans saw that if you were out of work, it must have been your fault. You worked for a bad company. If you didn't have enough food for your family, it was because you weren't working hard enough or your family wasn't working hard enough, right? Well, Americans really kind of took these ideas very seriously at this time. And it creates a tremendous amount of angst in American society, a tremendous amount of concern amongst a lot of Americans, wondering, why aren't I making it? Why aren't things good for me? I'm working hard, right? So American society gets kind of stratified here for the first time in a long time. The American society really has social classes. Now think about this. Back when everybody's a farmer, in the late 18th century, 1790s, when most Americans get their livelihood from a farm, even a rich farmer isn't that much different than a poor farmer. Now, don't get me wrong, there can be some very big differences there as well, especially in the South before the Civil War. Rich planters had a much different life than poor farmers in the South. But all in all, a lot of Americans could still identify with each other. They did things the same way at the same times in the same ways. But now things are much different in this industrial society, and it's going to cause a lot of bitterness in some cases. It's also going to cause a lot of anxiety about why people aren't succeeding when they feel they should be. Right? So some things that Americans are going to have to deal with. Now, one of the reasons why Americans don't deal with it immediately, both from these ideas that Charles Spencer puts out, or Herbert Spencer puts out, excuse me, thinking about that these ideas of survival of the fittest, social Darwinism, the ideas like Horatio Alger that anybody can attain the American dream, those kind of buy some people off, kind of make them think, okay, this is more my responsibility. The flip side of this is also the fact that a lot of technological innovations come about in this time. It's a tremendous growth in American entrepreneurship in the United States during the late 19th century, where you have people like Alexander Graham Bell developing the telephone. You have people like Thomas Alva Edison seemingly coming up with a new product every week, every month, right? Americans see the ability to communicate over long distances by voice in the telephone. Things like the electric light bulb come along and light up the night, allow Americans to do more things during more parts of the day in a safer way without fire having to be used. And the fact that he starts coming up with things like movie projectors and phonographs and other kind of modern marvels, allowing Americans even more opportunities at entertainment, really makes Americans feel that they're living in a great time, a very dynamic period, that things are always getting better. There's very much a sense of optimism that permeates American society at this point. It allows them to kind of look past a lot of these problems that they really know are there, but allows them to kind of focus on the future, thinking that we'll solve those problems, that those problems are going to go away, that things are going to get better, not just for some, but for all of us. And you can kind of see that shows up in things like World's Fairs, these great fairs. They're these places where people would go to entertain themselves, to see exhibits, to see works of art, sort of like what we do at our county fair here in Fresno each year. Right? Well, those had been going on for a long time. And in the 1800s, they were showing not maybe agricultural produce, but they were showing technological innovations, things like alternating generators at the World's Fair in Chicago that were used to actually provide the electricity for all the lights there at the World's Fair. Also, they would take tours at the 1876 Centennial exhibit in Philadelphia, celebrating the first 100 years of the United States. They had a giant steam engine that helped provide power for the fair, and people would line up to buy tickets to tour this machine. So there's this really idea that this modern world could really solve a lot of problems, that it was quite fantastic, that a lot of things that were happening were quite innovative. Think about that. People were lining up to look at this steam engine in 1876. Today, we still have people that kind of line up for the latest technological innovation, right? Things like the iPhone. A lot of people stand out in front of the Apple stores the day before the new latest gadget goes on sale. So Americans still kind of do these same things, right? Again, kind of looking past some of the big problems in their society and focusing a little bit more on the new, right? The now, getting a feel that something has changed for the better here. And this kind of permeates American culture at the time. So some things to kind of keep in mind here, right, as you go through the textbook PowerPoint, right? One big aspect of the Gilded Age I want you to remember is people kind of go from working for themselves to working for someone else for a paycheck. And that's going to cause kind of a stratification in American society, something that really hadn't existed before. Because even if in the past there were rich farmers and poor farmers, the poor farmers still kind of own their own labor. They own their land. They kind of had control over themselves. But when you go to work for somebody else in a factory or in a job, right, you lose that control. You're giving that up for that paycheck. So that kind of creates new dynamics in American society. There's also this idea that you're expected to take care of yourself, right? This idea of social Darwinism, that the best, the most that should survive are going to survive. The others are going to be weeded out. They're going to die off, either a business or an individual. It is a very harsh environment at this time in the United States. But at the same time, there is this incredible sense of optimism about the future, that things are getting better all the time and they're going to continue getting better. It allows them to kind of look past a lot of these problems, at least initially. What we're going to find is eventually they can't look past them anymore and they're going to have to fix these problems, kind of get these inequalities out of the system for the United States to really kind of go forward in and of itself. But that reform movement can't happen without this Gilded Age happening in the 1800s. All right. So please look at the PowerPoint lecture for our chapter. Keep in mind some of these things that we've looked at, and then please keep in mind these aspects that we've kind of talked about in our introductory video and in the lecture PowerPoint from the textbook. When you look at some of the documents I've assigned for this particular section, you'll see that the one by Russell Conwell is one of these kind of social Darwinists. The other is going to be a social commentator of the period, Mark Twain, a prolific writer in his own right in the late 19th century, who's going to have a different take on what's happening in American society. So I think you can see a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about here in this video and in our PowerPoint lecture are going to really permeate that society. They're really going to resonate with a lot of people one way or the other. So kind of keep these things in mind, look through it, and then we'll move forward together. All right? Thank you very much.